A blast is such a quick thing. And when we see them in movies, they seem to go on forever. And actually, even when you're in it, like, time slows down as far as the bit that comes after the bang goes off. But in the moment where the bang is triggered, you know, when a foot hits a pressure plate, and all of a sudden, in less than a second, the entirety of someone's life is just completely altered. Hi, I'm JJ Chalmers. I'm a TV presenter and a former Royal Marines Commando. People often remark that what's happened to me is some horrible tragedy, and it should never have happened. But the reality was, I was a Royal Marine, and I was in a war zone. And these things happen. Despite our best efforts, when you are in a conflict like that and you're an active participant in it, you have to accept that that is a possibility, and then you have to live with the consequences of that for the rest of your life. And as difficult as that can be sometimes, actually I do fully accept it. But if you are just someone who's a civilian that just happens to be born in the wrong place, really, that's a tough thing to sit with. And I'm a father now. I wasn't at the time. I cannot imagine what it's like to go to bed at night and think that anything could possibly happen to my kids as they lay in their bed. Or if they go out to play, you know, like any parent does, I worry about them falling out of a tree and breaking their arm, or, you know, the types of things that happens in a Western world, for example. But how could you ever send your kids out the door if you knew improvised explosive devices were there? But I also know that people live in parts of the world where conflict is a reality. Life has to go on in some way, shape or form. And that's unimaginable for us. But that is absolutely the way of life for far too many people. So on the 27th of May, 2011, I was on a large operation into a village and a heartland. We were in a very dangerous neighborhood. And as part of that task, we had identified what we believed was the bomb-making factory for the area. So I was part of a team tasked with moving into an area where we believed this bomb-making factory to be, searching a compound and securing it. Whilst we were doing that, unfortunately, one of my team triggered an improvised explosive device, and a massive explosion went off. For want of a better phrase, I was pretty well bludgeoned by the blast. These things are buried in the ground, and so when they explode and it starts throwing around things the size of house bricks, all the way down to, you know, little peppercorns of dirt and fragmentation. And a bomb pretty much looks for the path of least resistance, and that's where I happened to be standing. So all of this dirt, this grime, this frag came my way, and it pretty much bludgeoned me from head to toe. My face was crushed, my arms more or less came off, obviously lost a couple of fingers on my left hand. My neck was broken, my eardrums were burst, my legs were full of dirt, grime, frag, infection. But I was alive. Thankfully, some of my section were still alive as well, albeit pretty shook up. They jumped on top of me, they gave me life-saving and limb-saving first aid. And within 1 hour of the blast going off, I had been airlifted. So I made it to that hospital within what we call the golden hour. And from that point on, you know, I was able to begin my recovery. But that was a pretty long process as well. My physical recovery lasted around about 5 years. I spent 9 weeks in hospital to begin with in the Queen Elizabeth, Birmingham. I then spent about a year in and out of a full-time rehab facility, which is called Headley Court. It was the UK's military rehabilitation centre at the time. And then my subsequent recovery, albeit sort of done from home, I was cared for and looked after and monitored by the Royal Marines themselves. And I was retained in service throughout my recovery. And I was supported by a huge number of different organisations, whether they were government or charities, and a lot of people as well. And a lot of people helped put me back together. That is not the case for the vast majority of people. You know, I had survived pretty well unsurvivable wounds at that time. So, you know, the journey back from that is significant, and it takes a huge physical and mental toll on an individual and the people around them. I think about what my life looked like in my moment of injury, my recovery, and now my life now. And actually all of those stages, they've been pretty tough, you know, with reflection. I might not have always let that on at the time, but it certainly was the case. And I was a 23-year-old Royal Marine Commando, right? That's a pretty capable human being. So trying to imagine what that process would look like for a child is horrific. And then trying to think about the bit that comes after, the way that a disability, a blast injury, trauma is going to change the path of any individual's life, let alone a child. It's pretty well unimaginable, really. So if you then stick a child in a conflict zone, if they witness the type of trauma that I've seen, the way that is going to affect the way they see the world, that alone is unimaginable. And it all happens in a single moment. A blast is such a quick thing. And when we see them in movies, they seem to go on forever. And actually, even when you're in it, like, time slows down as far as the bit that comes after the bang goes off. But in the moment where the bang is triggered, you know, when a foot hits a pressure plate, and all of a sudden, in less than a second, the entirety of someone's life is just completely altered. That shouldn't have to be someone's normal. Shouldn't have to be anyone's, let alone a kid's. Like, I couldn't imagine my children living anywhere close to that. You know, if it comes on the news, I have the luxury of being able to turn it off. Like, kids in that part of the world, kids in those circumstances don't. Parents can't protect their kids at the best of times. Adjusting to a life with a physical injury and a disability, it is a huge adjustment. So much of my physical ability, which was particularly high, bearing in mind I was a Royal Marine Commando, you know, to be robbed of all of that and to be dependent on others was really, really difficult. You know, as a Royal Marine, you are fiercely independent. I mean, you're perhaps codependent in the sense that, you know, you do depend on the people either side of you, but at least you're giving something in return to them. In this circumstance, when you're just, you know, as I was, pretty much just a head in a bed with cables and wires and, you know, feeding tubes sticking out of me, I hated how much I had to take from others. But in hindsight, I'm very grateful that I had all of that support. You know, my disability is only going to get worse as my life goes on. I struggle to do things just about every single day. You know, I look at my daughter, and every time I pick her up, she's getting bigger. And I know the day is going to come where I'm not able to pick her up anymore. And I know that day is going to come sooner than I would have wanted. And I have to accept that. One of the biggest catalysts within my recovery was a thing called the Invictus Games. It's a sports competition, or adapted sports competition for wounded, injured and sick service personnel from all across the world. I took part in recumbent cycling, so basically riding an adult tricycle, for want of a better phrase. It is a bike or trike which is, you know, specially adapted to my injuries that allowed me not just to get out and ride my bike, but race and compete at it. And that element of being part of a competition, having something to sort of get out of bed in the morning and focus on, and a challenge to aspire to, was really important. I would say that my kids, and they're both under the age of 10, are more aware of conflict than your average kid in single figures. And that's because they've grown up with me. And they've grown up with the normality that comes from, having a father with a disability, and having a lot of, friends. There's the sort of, Uncle Dave with the robot legs. Like, they've grown up with this sense of normality around it, which is exactly how it should be, because, listen, this stuff is normal. I think if you can safely and tastefully educate children about the realities of what is going on in the world, they're going to grow up and hopefully be able to do something about it. But at the same time, you do want them to have that sense of innocence as well, because there's some scary things out in that world. But for the grace of God, I'm lucky they don't have to live with it directly. Yeah, I was 23 and I thought I knew a thing or two. Here I am 15 years later, a father. It completely changes my perspective on life. I like to think I'm a bit of a realist. Like, I know, try as we might, that sadly we live in a world where conflict continues to rear its head. But I also know it's not as simple as good versus evil, goodies and baddies. Wars are complex things. Conflicts are difficult. And they should be the absolute last resort. In amongst that, when you've got warring factions, power clashing, there's always people just caught in the middle of it. And far too often as well, it's young people, it's kids. And we just got to do better. I think we just got to do better.